Salvete amici, this is Magister Muth kicking off my first walkthrough video on Pliny's letters for the AP Latin curriculum. Before we get started, I just wanted to cover a couple notes and reminders. First of all, just like anyone, I don't magically know how all of these Latin texts work the second I look at them. I use a lot of reference materials, as you should, as you're trying to work through these difficult original Latin texts. In particular for Pliny's letters, I've been relying on the great work done by Geoffrey Steadman in his College Pliny and Vergil commentary. Additionally, whenever words I don't know, I look them up in a Latin dictionary. Latinitium.com is a great one with more detailed entries, and there are plenty of other ones you can buy on your shelf. Sometimes I have to look up grammar concepts, like in Allen and Greeno's tome, or distilled in much more understandable form by the likes of Ben Jonson in Latin Tutorial. And sometimes even your Latin teachers do get stuck, and it's really helpful to look at a reference translation that someone else has done to see if that can help unlock what's going on in a particularly tricky phrase or sentence. So I hope to model that process myself. Additionally, having a walkthrough video might seem like a very convenient resource and maybe one that might reduce a little bit of your homework load. So I wanted to briefly discuss what I see as the best practices for using these videos to help you actually get better at Latin. And really the most important advice is don't let them replace using your own brain. It's very important to try to understand and read the Latin sentences on your own first. And you have lots of resources to help you there, whether that's a commentary, dictionaries, everything that I gave you before. Then, if you get stuck on certain phrases or sentences, or you just want a little reassurance that you got it right, that would be a great time to watch one of these videos to help you hear someone else walk through. I know Latin's a fairly niche subject area, and there isn't the same amount of online resources or support as other subjects, which is part of what I'm trying to rectify with these videos. And be curious. If you hear me mention some term, some vocabulary word that you don't already know, look it up. That might help you understand better in the future. Now, the flip side of that is it's very tempting to just, as soon as you get assigned some lines by your Latin teacher, to fire up the video and make some annotations and copy down the translation as I walk through it. And I would caution you against that because in the short term, you'll get through your homework faster, but in the longer term, it won't help you build any of the skills you get by actually struggling with the difficult process of translating Latin literature. All right, so with that brief plug, let's get into it. And as a reminder for my students, I use a visual color coding system to help identify noun cases and tag our verbs. That helps me structure my annotations. So you can see the box in the top right. I will be using that system throughout these videos. So let's start with Pliny's letter, Book 6, Letter 16, the first of his two Vesuvius letters. And like all Roman letters, they're going to start with the greeting. That C, that's going to stand for the praenomen Gaius, Gaius Plinius, tacito suo, S. And if we look this up in a commentary, it will say this S stands for something along the lines of salutem dicit. This is a very formulaic way of starting a letter where you have the nominative of the writer. Gaius Plinius, this is the nephew, Pliny the Younger, he salutem dicit, he literally says his salutations, or says greetings, and you're going to say greetings to a dative, to his own Tacitus. And this is the well-known historian Tacitus, and Pliny will explain very soon why he's writing to this particular person. Starting with our next sentence, I usually like to look for verbs and any sort of structure and clauses before I start diving into the nitty-gritty. So I'm going to start tagging my verbs in yellow. Well, we start with petis. That's a second-person verb. And right away, I see ut. Ut makes me think of some subordinate ut clause, usually with a subjunctive verb. And sure enough, I see scribam. So it looks like our ut clause is going to be there. Maybe some sort of purpose. We'll come back to that. And now I have quo. Well, quo is often a relative pronoun, so it looks like we have another subordinate clause that starts here and goes through posis. Posis, that's the main verb from possum in the subjunctive, and usually we'll expect an infinitive, tradere, to complete the meaning of possum. All right, so our subject of petis from our personal endings, that is a singular you, tu petis. You seek, or you ask, ut, that. Now we're going to have a subordinate clause, and since you're asking someone to do something, we'll call that an example of an indirect command. And I apologize in advance for my heinous handwriting. All right, so you are asking that scribam. The subject of that ending is ego, that I write. And what am I going to write? Now we need an accusative direct object. And scanning through, I see exitum. It's a verbal noun from exeo, a going out, or an exit, or in this case, most likely a death. So you ask that I write about the death. Here, scribo, we can say write about, even though it just takes a accusative object. And what death am I writing about? The death of our genitive phrase, avunculi mei, of my uncle, who we might know from context is Pliny the Elder. And you ask that I write this tibi, to you. Now, we have our second subordinate clause, which is going to be expressing a purpose. And there's a type of purpose construction that instead of using ut, uses quo, the adverb by which, and then some sort of comparative adverb like verius. So that's not just true from verus, that is more truly. So you asked me to write about my uncle's death. Why? This is literally an ablative quo by which posis, we see tu is the subject of our present subjunctive compound of sum, by which you are able, tradere, to hand over something, verius, hand it over how? More truly, and then we have an indirect object with our compound of dodare, hand it over to posteris. That's where we get posterity in English, to, future generations, or to the people who come next. So this phrase, it's a little complicated, but by which you may more truly do this, you can see that's a purpose construction saying how you're going to accomplish it. So taking a big step back, Pliny has been asked by Tacitus to write to him about his uncle's death. So he, the historian, can pass it down to future generations. All right, continuing along, gratias ago, nice simple phrase. I do thanks, or I give thanks, I thank you. Yeah, thanks for the request, Tacitus. Why? Well, nam, that's our for. Basically, it's going to be an explanation in English. So, for video. Let's see our verbs. So we have video. I see celebretur, which is part of some conditional clause here. And then I see esse. And when I see esse, I want to see, is it just esse or is it part of a perfect passive infinitive? And sure enough, I see esse propositam. That's all going to be one verb form in the infinitive. So back to our main verb, video. Ego video, for I, Pliny the Younger, see. And we see there's an infinitive coming up. I think we have an indirect statement with an accusative subject and an infinitive verb. So I see that gloriam immortalem, immortal or literally undying glory, esse propositam, as a perfect passive infinitive. So we want that's from propono, to propose or to put forth. So that immortal glory has been put forth or was put forth. For what? Well, we have this dative of morti, for the death, eius, genitive of Aeneid, for the death of him, or for his death. And when will this happen? It will happen si celebretur. That's a present subjunctive from the first conjugation. So if it should be celebrated, a te. And the tenses might sound a little weird so far, but since we have if it should be celebrated, I want this to be a should, would condition, with a present subjunctive. So I think that this esse propositam was perhaps replacing some sort of subjunctive. So I see that there would be, immortal glory would be put forth for his death if it were celebrated by you. And here the perfect tense, being a completed action in the present, can sometimes be treated as a primary sequence tense. I think that's what's going on here. All right. So why would there be immortal glory? Well, Tacitus is a famous historian. So being celebrated by a famous historian equals glory. All right. Now we get into the toughest sentence of this paragraph, in my opinion. It's really long, so let's start by looking for some verbs and structure. So we start with quam vis. That's going to be an although clause. And we don't get that main verb all the way until occiderit. So that's our first clause there. Then we have a second although clause, which goes through condiderit. And within that, there's a couple notable phrases like this ut something and quasi something that we'll look at a little closer in a minute. And since although is a subordinate clause, we still need a main verb, so that's going to be all the way at the bottom, adet. All right, so although occiderit, although condiderit, adet. Let's break it down. So our first verb, occiderit, notice it's a short I, so that's going to be to fall or to die, as opposed to fell or to kill from kaido if it's a long I. So although he, she, or it died. Looks like a perfect subjunctive in this concessive clause. And in context, we're going to take this as Pliny the Elder, the avunculus. So although he died, let's look at the quasi phrase, as if semper victurus. So as if he, the subject, is always victurus. And it's tempting to think this is from winco, which is winco, vincere, vici, victum. But if we look in our commentary, we'll see this is actually from vivo. So to live, vivo, vivere, vixi, victum. So this is about to live. So he died as if he was always going to live. So we can think about, what does he mean by that? Maybe something about his dying in the prime of life, or maybe he's going to live eternally in people's memories. And he died ut populi ut urbes. So here we're having ut not as a purpose clause, but in its other sense as or just as. So he died just like populi, multiple peoples, and just as urbes, just as cities, both of those things, occiderit, died. And how did they die? In a casu, a downfall, literally from cado cadere, or a misfortune, a memorabili casu, ablative. So they died in, or a memorable catastrophe or misfortune. And now we can finally get back to that last phrase, clade, in another word for disaster, in a disaster of, now we have a genitive plural phrase split up by clade, of the most beautiful lands. pokerrima, most beautiful, superlative. And that Aeneid just connects us back to the last sentence showing we're explaining why. We can also take it as a for. So let's put that first one together. For, although he died in the destruction of the most beautiful lands, just like peoples and cities died in this memorable catastrophe, as if he was always going to live. And what are these beautiful lands and people and cities that were destroyed? These are all the cities like Pompeii and Herculaneum in the Bay of Naples destroyed by the catastrophe of the eruption of Vesuvius, as we'll learn in much more detail soon. Now we get to our second although clause, although ipse condiderit. That's a masculine of singular of ipse, although he himself condiderit. Well, condo is to establish, to found like a city, or perhaps complete. So although he maybe accomplished opera, neuter plural, works. What kind of works? Plurima, a great many, and mansura, that's from maneo. It's a future active participle, to stay. So works that are many and about to stay, or going to last. So although he died in a really famous event, and although he himself completed some lasting works, we'll talk more about Pliny the Elder's background somewhere else, but he was a famous academic who wrote a massive encyclopedia and several other literary works that Pliny the Younger is claiming are going to last the test of time themselves. So although all of those things, tamen, nevertheless, goes very nicely with our although. And now something is going to add something to something else. And it turns out the subject of adet will add, nice future tense. That is aeternitas, a third declension nominative, which doesn't look super nominative here, but I think that's what we have going on here. So eternity, adet, will add, and what's it going to add? Multum, a lot. I think we need some descriptors here. It is a specific eternity. It is the eternity of scriptorum tuorum, of your scripta, of your things having been written, of your writings. So that's Tacitus's writings will add much to the dative perpetuitas, to the perpetuity or maybe everlastingness, eius, of him. And here I think we're talking about the avunculus, Pliny the Elder again. So in summary, he's really famous because of how he died and because of his literature, but you, Tacitus, writing about him will make him even more famous and everlasting. All right, indeed. Our next sentence just has one main verb, puto, and then we have a relative clause, quibus. And the main verb here is going to be a perfect passive, datum est. That's going to go with a couple infinitives, facere and scribere. So puto, that's an ego verb, I think, and we're going to have to supply them. So there's a group of people who are going to be defined by this quibus clause. Maybe we can put an eos in there. I think them to be beatos, blessed. And which people are this them that I think are beatos? The ones, quibus, for whom, we'll see in a sec, this is a dative relative, for whom datum est. That's an impersonal passive verb. It has been given. And here, dodare can sometimes mean to give someone the license to do something or to allow. So those people for whom it was allowed, how was it allowed? Ablative of means, munere, by the gift deorum of the gods, to do either something or something else. We have this out, out. So either to facere scribende, they're allowed to do scribenda, things that are to be written, or things worthy of writing about, or to scribere, to write legenda, things to be read. So Pliny here is saying that the status of beatus, being a blessed person, is the ones who can write awesome, do awesome deeds that are worthy of writing down, or to write down awesome stuff worthy of reading. Vero, this is going to be a contrast, but truly, beatissimos. We're going to have to supply a parallel structure. I think those people are most blessed. Now I have a contrast here. Which ones? The ones quibum, for whom it is allowed by the grace of the gods, yada yada, to do utrumque, both. So most of the words aren't repeated. That's very common in Latin parallel structure, but we can see we fill in the beatissimos as our parallel, the quibuses, and this utrumque is kind of going with these verbal ideas of what they're allowed to do. So most blessed are those for whom it's allowed to do both. What does he mean both? Well, he's implying that his uncle is the kind of person who both did the writable and wrote the readable. So, wow, what a guy. And he's very explicit in his next sentence. So our main verb here is erit, someone will be something, and it is avunculus meus. My uncle will be in numero, in the number or the count. What count? The count horum, of these people. The people he just talked about, the both people. He will be in their count. How? Et suis libris et tuis. Now we have a nice et, both this and that. And he's famous both from his own books, suis libris, and from tuis libris, your books, Tacitus the historian. So to wrap up, quo libentius. Once again, we have this ablative, by which libentius, more freely or more willingly, suscipio. I, Pliny the Younger, literally sub plus capio, undertake, or kind of endeavor or take up this task. So because of all that, I more graciously take up this task. Etiam, in fact, even I deposco it. I demand. And what do I demand? I demand quod in iungis, the thing which you, Tacitus, in iungo. This is from iungo, the join root, and if you look it up, it might say it means to the thing which you enjoin. I'll admit, I had to look up that English word as well. It's related to an injunction, so it's basically an order or a ask to do something. So Pliny's saying, I'm not only willingly undertaking this task that you asked of me, namely writing about my uncle's death, in fact, I demand the opportunity to tell you about it. All right, that wraps up our first 10 lines. Thanks for bearing with me, and I'll be back in another video soon. Valete!